Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Mel Stiekman. She is the Director of Revenue Operations at BTC Inc. She is local to Austin, Texas. Mel, thanks so much for doing this. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
It is my pleasure. We ask everyone in the Tiki Bar the same first question. What did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a great question. It looks a little bit different of where I've landed today, but I grew up always wanting to be a dancer, and I did dance most of my life. And I was about to get onto Point Ballet, and I broke my foot.
Oh,
And
no.
that was at the end of eighth grade, and that ended my dancing career
Okay,
formally.
well, I'm sorry to hear that, but take me through life as a dancing kid. So it sounds like you're doing ballet, like you're very into this as a young kid.
Yeah, I was doing all types of dance and a lot of different dance schools and was always dancing to the beat of my own drum and on and off stage. And it was, a hobby that I did take seriously. And, I think as you grow up as a dancer, there's a lot of competition. And I've quickly learned I'm not really the competitive type. I am very influential and I like to lead and guide, but being the actual competitor is not really for me. So I think things landed as they were supposed to.
Yeah, fair enough. And where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. Since then, I've lived in 5 states, and now Austin, Texas is home.
There you go. Were you a studious kid along with your dancing ways?
Studious, I think it depends how we define that, but I did always excel in school. I think some things came naturally, and other subjects, I had to study for sure. But I was, more or less top of class, I would say.
Love that. Now, tell me about the first time you ever got paid to work. Maybe it was odd jobs as a kid, like babysitting, mowing lawns, anything like that growing up.
For sure. My first, I guess, real job, I was a sandwich artist at Subway, and very glorified title there, but it was cool. I was able to actually walk there when I was in high school, so I was able to just pick up some hours here or there, and that was really the first job. And that, another part-time early on job was at Staples Copy Center. So I was ringing that button. That was easy back in the day. And so, between those two, as well as, sports and dance and school, I was pretty busy as a kid, I would say.
Yeah. Are there any moments you remember most about either of those like early jobs about having to like whether it's deal with clients or go to work when you don't have to or things that an experience might have taught you?
For sure. I can remember several moments when I was working at Staples, actually, you would get clients coming in to do any type of print job because I was working in the print and copy center, and there's one element of the customer's always right, but there's also the reality of, what products can you actually sell or what services can you actually provide. And I learned very early, very on that, customers will come in having whatever type of day they're having and project that on you. And I've learned that, if you can stay compiled and calm and collected and sometimes even or act as other people's therapists, you can make the customer happy, even if it's not the exact thing that they asked for. A lot of it just has to
Yeah,
do with tonality and presentation.
you probably having to like explain to them certain things about file formats and stuff like that, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was an interesting time, well before the age of AI, that's for sure.
All right. I go next to your academic career. You go to Penn State University, if I'm tracking correctly. When you're walking into Penn State, do you have any idea for you what you want a career to look like afterwards?
Not at all. I was a undecided student mostly through my junior year. And that's about the time when you have to decide what your major is going to be. And so I took a look at all the classes that I had taken for those former 2 years and kind of said, all right, where are these classes fitting into, what bucket or what specialty? And really it led me to a communications degree, specifically in public relations. And so I do joke that my bachelor's is professional persuasion, just kind of a bit of a PR ploy, if you will. But I really decided at the end there. But it kind of made sense that all the classes I was taking were around communications and media and trends, and that's kind of where I landed.
Did you have a favorite class at Penn State that was either in that world or another one that ended up being your top one?
Absolutely. There's actually and for anyone who either has gone to Penn State or is familiar with, that curriculum, there's a course or courses that fall under the sociology bucket, Soc 119, and it's very specific to race relations. And it's a really incredible professor who basically has open dialogues about uncomfortable things that we don't typically talk about all around race and relations, certainly at that age in college. And I loved it so much that I actually became one of the moderators for that class. It was like
Cool.
a TA program, but essentially you were moderating and kind of provoking conversations to see what the classroom would think of and speak to it. So it was really powerful, and it's interesting even today. Many decades later, I still take a lot of what I learned in that class to heart. And, I think it really has helped me just be a well rounded human overall.
Absolutely. Shout out to the sociology department. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then I see that you also spent some time in Amsterdam. It looks like for university as well. Now, I lived in Amsterdam for a brief part of life and absolutely loved it. So I'm eager to hear what brought you there, and can you take me through your experience?
Absolutely. Yes. It was my semester abroad. It was kind of in that same year where I didn't really have a major lined up, and I was looking at all the different countries that I could possibly go to. And Amsterdam was on that list. I think it was one of the beauties of a bigger, larger university. There's a lot more programs already established. I didn't have to go through
Hmm.
any legwork to establish a program in that country. And I was like, no way, this is awesome. I always fascinated about Amsterdam. I do bicycle a lot, and so I think that was part of it. And then I think some of the other draws to it were just being a society and community of openness, and that's something that has always resonated with me. And when I was there, it proved all of that true. Not only is Amsterdam in the Netherlands a beautiful country, it's a very inclusive place. I actually think there's some parallels with Austin and Amsterdam around the natural beauty of the city as well as the inclusivity. And while I was only there for 8 months, it felt like a lifetime in a good way, and I fell in love with that city. And I have gone back many times since, and hope to continue to return year after year if I possibly can.
It is
I
one
will
of my
say the
favorite.
only thing I don't miss is the cold, and that's also why I moved to Austin, Texas. I like it hot, and I don't think I will full time live in a place of four seasons anymore. I did my time.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I had the same experience. It's such a vibrant city, so beautiful. Love the biking, all the colors, and I'm also a warm weather person. But make it back to Amsterdam any chance I can.
For sure. And I will just
Okay,
share one quick
please.
story that was really one of my most memorable moments of being a student there. One of the courses I took was art history. And our professor, who was a Dutch woman, she essentially was our private tour guide for all the museums. And we would bike to the different museums as a class. And it's just such a unique way to field trip, when your teacher is physically guiding you on the bike lane. And then at the end of the semester, she invited the entire class into her home for tea and crackers and to just reflect on the semester, which is also very, very unique. Not many times do you get invited or even want to go to your professor's home, but it was really cool. And her home was almost like a mini museum as well. So it was very memorable, that course.
Did you have a favorite museum out of the ones in Amsterdam?
It's a little of a untraditional take, but I loved a museum. It's still around. It's called the Foam Museum. It's a photography museum, and it's spelled, I think, FOAM. The reason why I like it is it's pretty small. It's a couple, maybe four floors, and each floor is something different. So there's one or two floors that are always the rotating global photographers. There's always a floor of local photographers, and then there's even a floor often of student photographers. And I just think it's a really cool format for a museum, and also a really good way to get, smaller names of artists out there, and so the foam is one that I always go to when I return, because it's something you can go through in an hour or two. It doesn't take all day.
I completely forgot about this place, but I've been here. You memory jogged me here, and I'm looking at it now. I had a great time at this museum. So yes, Foam Museum. We'll give them a shout out as part of this. I love
Yeah,
that.
go foam.
But okay, the party's over. You graduate college, and I assume you then need to go get a job. Take me through the experience of leaving college, figure out your major late, and then figure out what's next.
Yeah. Right after college at Penn State, I packed my car and moved to Southern California for that style American dream. And once I got there, I quickly realized, okay, whoa, how am I going to put food on the table and a roof over my head? And those first few months out there were pretty brutal. I mean, I was, walking in and out of every restaurant, applying to every job I could just to get, some small paycheck. And I did for a very short stint work at a restaurant. I was the hostess, so I was able to use those people person skills, if you will. But one day I got a call out of the blue from a recruiter, and I had no experience working with recruiters before. It was nothing I really used strategically to find jobs. And I was somehow found by this recruiting agency. And they were looking for an executive assistant to the CEO of some startup. And they couldn't name the startup yet, that type of moment because it was so early on, but I was going to take any interview I could. And so I did. And, there was some briefing here or there before just so I could know what I was walking into. And I remember when I walked into this Santa Monica office, that first interview, and, and the recruiter even told me like, hey, these are Silicon Beach guys. Don't wear a suit, look put together. But like, she was really kind of manicuring me to make sure that I fit in, right? Because I'm coming from a little bit more of a business Northeast mentality. And I walk in to this, kind of open space floor plan office, and the CEO and the two other C-suite were standing there in their wetsuits, and they were like pulled down. And I just remember being, 21 at the time. And I'm like, am I in the right place? Like, am I early? Am I here at the right time? And they're just on, Southern California time, just coming back from their sunrise surf. And so I just kind of hung out, in the lobby while they proceeded to take showers in the rooftop shower. And, shortly after I, went into the interview and, used my skills as just as a student that I learned, how to speak and how to persuade, but really really dove deep and treated the conversation like a discovery call. I was asking a lot of questions and a lot of the why now, what are you looking to achieve? Where's the business growing, this or that? And all these other things where, in hindsight, I'm like, how did I even know how to ask all those types of questions? But ultimately, I was called back for a second round where I got to meet more of the team and really showcased, the skills that I had. Organization, multitasking, and performing under pressure are three of those things that I still have with me today. And ultimately that was sold, to the CEO at the time. And it's really incredible that, that one call from a recruiter that I could have missed the call, right? I didn't know who that number was. And I think now I hardly ever answer my phone if I don't know who it is.
Yeah.
But that call allowed me to land that first job. And the environment of this startup was so much startup that I wasn't just his assistant. I became the office manager who was also issuing insurance and running all the HR functions, who was then supporting our transition as we were getting acquired. And so all those contracts and all the business operations would flow through my desk. So I naturally learned how to run a business from some of those, some of those organizational sides. I was there when we made our first sale. So I started to build out a sales operations arm. And that's really ultimately what pivoted me into kind of where I'm at today. I mean, many, many moons later, but it really was this crazy trajectory from that first day that got me to where I am today.
So you're a kid basically, and you move all the way across the country to Southern California, packed up your car. Take me back to that moment for a minute. There's any apprehension or fear? I mean, you clearly are willing to go for it. What's going through your mind at that time?
Yeah, in my high school, I would say not many people left the state for college. So I was already, kind of that eager person or that go-getter. Change never brought fear. If not, it actually excited me. And even though there were so many unknowns and there were fears driving across the country, at the same time, I didn't see any other option that was more exciting. And that those unknowns are what excited me and which propelled me and always have propelled me to continue to fight, to continue to build and continue to learn and adopt to whatever that is kind of in front. And so I think, really, if nothing less, really one of the scary parts Didn't happen until a year later when my student loans kicked in because I had deferred the payments for a year while I got on my feet. But even then, I had already established a place within this organization where I was able to budget and manage those expenses, which is a reality. I think that in a world where if we weren't tied to those types of restraints or requirements, there's many other things perhaps I would entertain, but the reality is there are bills to pay.
Yeah.
And so I think that was what was scary, but at the same time that also gave me that ammo to grow and to take on more responsibility and to lean into the autonomy that I had so early on in my career, and it's really invaluable, I would say.
Was there something about that first role? Because I'm really interested in this kind of arc of yours where clearly the momentum, the natural momentum of the company is kind of propelling you into these different skills and learnings. At any point during that, did you stop? Maybe it was like one project or something, and you go like, "Oh, I'm good at this," and it kind of clicks for you what it is you're actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned very briefly, I was at this company when we had our first sale, and we were in the digital advertising space, just for context. And so, that first sale happened, and I was partnering with our CRO, although he was CRO slash CFO because we were just scrappy and everyone wore a lot of hats, figuratively and literally, like I was saying. But that one sale taught me that we had no process, no sales process, no ops process, no invoicing process. And so we had to figure all that out. And what I learned from that moment is that not only do I love to establish and build process, whether it's something manual, automated with a tool or without, I also like to enable and to coach that process. And so that moment also what allowed me to pivot in the ops and enablement space, which I sat in for close to a decade. Because again, I like to build the process, but also teach it and really have a hand in that change management and that behavior change and that learning curve. To me, that's energizing. It's energizing others to follow that. And it comes with its challenges, of course. But I would say that's really what was kind of an aha moment for me of where I wanted to focus time and energy. It wasn't being the office manager. It was really getting in there in the weeds and learning how can we scale. And a lot of that is repeatable, scalable processes.
Yeah, and you go on. I'm looking at your LinkedIn here to go on for like amazing companies, AOL, Verizon, Restaurant 365. Like I could go on awesome companies. I'm curious in your trajectory there. So you're obviously pretty natural at it. You move up the ranks really quickly. Is there a time when sort of the opposite happens? You have a moment where you have to learn something like the hardest way.
Yeah, that's kind of a twofold. So for a little bit of context, this company that I was speaking of early on in my career, that company got acquired by AOL and then got acquired by Verizon. So it actually was a company that I had stayed with for all these years through all
Mm.
those transformations. And at some point, it was shortly after I moved to Austin, I really felt that I wasn't being challenged anymore. And I was in what I call maintenance mode. And I was getting bored. And it wasn't that I was slacking, it's that I honestly didn't have a lot to do and didn't really see an area of opportunity within the organization. And that's when I started to look for a new job, of which I did land that role at Restaurant 365, which was incredible because I was the first hire of that kind. So I was really able, back to autonomy, I did have that runway to really dive deep and assess where the needs were and focus on there. Only 3 months into that job, COVID hit and I was laid off. We closed our doors. I mean, our clients were a lot of restaurants who physically were closing their doors. And so I had not thrown away, but I had shelved this career with Verizon Media that I had in the bag for a long time to try something new. And that rug got pulled out from under me, which no one saw coming. And at the end of the day, there were much more tragedies than losing a job that unfortunately that we've all experienced here just as humans. But I went 6 months without finding another job. And it's not because I was incompetent, or it's not because I wasn't consistent and persistent, because that's one of the mottos that I tell my sales teams today, and it works. It was just a tough time, whether it was timing or maybe my network wasn't dialed in enough because I was so focused on this one company for so long, maybe not really networking, right? Because I was just under this one roof for so long. And that was really kind of a reality check to me. It was a wake up call that, maybe you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. And it is a lot about who you know. As annoying as that can sound, I mean, even moments like this, where you and I bumped into at dinner last week, it's amazing to have that community around you. And it doesn't happen overnight, and it does take active effort. And so that experience, which many of us have also felt over, during the year of 2020, and even since then. I mean, COVID is not something that just finished, right? It's something that has impacted us and will impact us forever. But it really did push me, I would say, on an intellectual level, to really continue to refine who I am, my voice, speak my brand, and build it, maybe even establish my brand. But stay connected with people, because that's where, that's where the real magic happens, is when we are collaborating together and not working in a vacuum. And I think that's really what was so impactful then.
I appreciate you telling that story. Now, tell me about getting out of it. So you said starting to build a personal brand, starting to kind of put yourself out there. Obviously, it worked, and you've since moved on. What did that process actually look like once you started kind of making those strides forward?
Yeah, I was only at Restaurant 365 for 3 months. So in some vein, I was still ramping. I felt like I didn't accomplish anything, even though I actually was introduced to a brand new tech stack that I hadn't used before. A lot of the tools are comparable, but even though I did have, some access, I felt like I didn't build much. And so what I really did was reflect on what were those accomplishments, in the prior 6-7 years. What are the things that I did build that I was proud of? Or what are the things that I did change that stuck? How did I energize organizations, or, make impacts to different teams? And through that, I really started to consider that the path of consultancy, which really is a whole different structure when you think about working, different dynamics, often having multiple clients versus just working for one. And the company that I did work for, Rev Shop, is a consultancy in themselves. And there's actually a joke that me and the founders used to have, that they didn't hire me, I hired them. And that joke is because I really believed in the mission, in go-to-market strategy and scaling that. And I really wanted that chance. And so I ultimately was the relentless candidate. And thankfully, they did take the chance on me, and I was able to establish a variety of programs for a suite of clients. And it was a really good run there, I would say. It taught me really to truly how to balance different priorities with different companies simultaneously. There's one thing of the RevOps leader I am now, where of course there's a million priorities across different teams, but it's under one roof with same mission, with same goal. When you're in a consulting role, there's a lot more variety, which kept things exciting for sure. And I think ultimately, just to kind of close out there, having, in some vein been out of the workforce for 6 months, that felt like a lifetime. And so I was so hungry to dive in and to roll up my sleeves and to take on all different types of projects, to then find what is my sweet spot. What do I like to do? Because I had to figure that out once again.
So tell me, how did you then end up at BTC?
Another COVID moment. Rev Shop was downsizing, and I was one that got the chopping block. And it, again, was the second inflection moment in, let's say 3 years it was. There's a lot of what did I do wrong, but kind of understanding it's really the climate of the entire ecosystem. And I was fearlessly looking for jobs, interviewing and applying. And what I was doing differently, though, is I was tapping into my network. I was becoming more involved, in RevOps and sales ops and sales enablement groups in Austin, and even just globally. And that experience really, I think, not only unlocked doors of expanding my network. But it also helped me build, let's say, my brand on things like LinkedIn. And BTC Inc. actually found me, which this is now the second time in a career that a company had found me. So yes, that feels good, but it also is just, and it's also the validation, like, I guess I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
And so it was really powerful because when I first was hired at BTC Inc., the role was advertised as sales enablement. And sweet, I love sales enablement. I love to build the process and to coach it and, to make sure that everyone's, checking those boxes and dotting those I's and crossing those T's. But when I got in there, I learned the role was much more, which for me was a bigger opportunity to really lean in and step up to that challenge and to position myself in the organization, at the level and the expertise I am providing. And so when I first started, not only did I just need a job, it was something I was interested in the events business and for a mission, which is Bitcoin, that I deeply believe in and did believe in well before I was actually at the company. So it was kind of this trifecta, if you will. And now 2 years later, I've leaned so much in the autonomy that I've scaled out an entire SDR pre-sales team, and I'm building out a revenue operations team as well. So a lot has happened in the 2 years under BTC Inc.'s watch.
I love that. All right. Now, as you're looking back, some of these questions are a little corny. I'll warn you, but they're all right. What is something? So you're now looking back on already a great career and in many different interesting angles. What are you unusually good at now that younger you would not have predicted?
I think I mentioned this earlier that I have, ever since a kid, saw myself as a leader with an influential voice, that people do, let's look up to and believe. I don't think I ever knew I could be as impactful as I could be to a leadership team without a seat at the leadership table. And that's exactly what I've done over the past year and a half until recently, in the vein of energizing the org and establishing trust and building a seat at that leadership table. I don't think that I would have ever saw myself advocating for myself that way. And, I'm grateful that I have spoken up when I believe in something, and I'm grateful to be in a workplace that is collaborative and that we do throw ideas out. Not all stick, but a lot of them do. And I'm really grateful for the environment that I have now at the company.
Was there anything that you wanted professionally that turned out not to matter?
Let me answer almost the opposite first, because then I think I might be able to get there. I've actually been working remote since 2016. It was just the nature of Verizon Media at the time. I was on the West Coast. My team was on the East Coast, so I never went into the local office, didn't really have to. So the work from home culture that really fostered since, COVID in 2020, I was, let's say, ahead of that curve because I was already working remote. And so now it's a non-negotiable for me. If a company had a mandate, I would probably have a hard time with that. And it's because I've learned to be so productive working from home. You're cutting time on commuting, even really getting ready, and you can just laser focus. Now, there are moments where I would like an option to, it would be nice to have a hub here in Austin and have the option to, but if it was a mandate, I think I would have a hard time. And that's something I never saw coming because those first several years, it was an in-office experience and it was awesome, right? It was startup vibes to the nines. And so on the flip side, something that doesn't really matter. That is interesting.
It's okay if you don't have one.
Yeah,
That was a great answer.
I'm still thinking though, something that doesn't matter. I mean, without sounding like RevOps and lame, I think, before RevShop, I was stuck to, the tech stack that was provided to me. At RevShop, being a consulting firm, we were tool agnostic because our clients could have, any suite of products. And now at BT Sync, I've actually purchased several tools, and more or less I chose the ones that were my preference, but I still don't think it matters, the actual tools. If you don't have the proper strategy and structure and process in place. I mean, we are now a HubSpot engine because that's what I purchased, mainly because I'm the admin and it's relatively easy to configure. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm like HubSpot's poster child. I am still tool agnostic. I think at the end of the day, again, it doesn't matter if the tool isn't being adopted. It doesn't matter what the tool is, but if the team's not using it, that's where the gap is. And so that's where my enablement arm comes in and shines, because nothing really matters if they're not following what we're supposed to be doing.
100%. All right. So if you're talking to someone who is driving across the country, they've got their stuff in the car and they're just about to start their career, they say, Mel, just about to start my career. What advice would you give me? What would you say?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't put your vinyl in the back window, because it will get warped by the sun and you will tarnish all your records.
Brutal.
That's the brutal life lesson I learned. But in all seriousness, I would probably tell that person to lean into the fear and talk about it. I think people can be either ashamed of negativity or not comfortable talking about the hard stuff. But I know that for me, at least, being human and talking about the pain points normalizes them. It also gets you to kind of get rid of some of that energy, and it allows you to face your fears and just go for it. I really believe you only miss the shots you don't take. And I know that's like oldest quote in the book, but it's true. I still have some colleagues or friends even that, are in the town that we grew up in and wish they left. And I tell them, you still can, right? You still can. And so normalizing just talking about what's going on, I think just helps. It helps you kind of cope with it as well as overcome it. Just like you would speak to a client in a discovery call about what are the problems they're having, right? So we can solution it or workshop it. It's the same sort of thing when it comes to your own fears.
I love that. All right. Our final question that we always ask in the Tiki Bar is a very selfish question for me, because I always want to know, what is one thing outside of work that you find yourself recommending to people? So this could be any book, TV show, yoga class, a practice that you do, taking a trip, something, just anything that you find yourself recommending to people.
Absolutely. I do it all the time. And it is a book. And it actually came from that SOCH 119 class. And I would grab it, except I know I lent it to my friend. It's called The 4 Agreements. And I think that these 4 agreements are a really good way to live by. I'm not going to say all of them because I want you guys to go and find the book and to read it yourself. But my favorite one is don't take anything personally. And I think that is, for me, a really humbling agreement or reminder or way to live by, because you never know what kind of day that person's having. And 99.9% of the time, it has nothing to do with you, regardless of how someone treats you. So I would say The 4 Agreements is a book that I often recommend. Super short. You can literally read it in a day. And yeah, that's what I would, and yeah, I think that's it.
Mel, well, thank you so much. We'll check out The 4 Agreements. We also have seen that you've done some content with RevOps Alliance, which we will link to in the show notes. And I would love to do this again. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I'll see you at the next dinner.